health workers who could even manage patients of the stature of COVID. They couldn't do free and mandatory testing as was expected by the WHO. We had no ICUs, no beds, we had nothing, we even had no PPEs. And indeed, the developed world was saying that, Africans are going to die like ants. Yes. And we all prepared to die like ants. But thank God that didn't happen, and that anticipation of gloom didn't happen. But it exposed what is going on within our healthcare system. The second wave of COVID-19, we saw how people struggled just to raise money to treat one COVID patient. Yeah. It just showed us that all of us are one illness away from total, complete poverty. Yeah. And it showed the importance of having social security. So the conversation started changing. Right now, even for the ULS to hold an entire symposium on the right to health, for me, it's an achievement within itself. Because way back, they are like, no, they are arresting some political prisoners. Let's go and rescue some victims of torture, which I know is very important. But ideally, a person's well-being and their ability to live a life which is of quality, I think supersedes any other thing.
So you're celebrating?
We are celebrating.
COVID-19 has tested our hope and faith as individuals, families, and the country at large. Besides destroying many aspects of our lives, the novel coronavirus has also affected our human rights in many ways. You and the Law, the COVID edition, is a 30-minute weekly television program that focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Uganda. The program engages experts to explain the importance of rights-based approaches to the success of any public health response to ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights amidst the challenges presented by COVID-19. You and the Law, the television program, brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda, taking the law to the last mile in proud association with I4C Africa Hub and House of Talent Television.
You know, we're working on a case in Mityana, and this is one of the saddest cases I had ever dealt with, because this woman was pregnant. It just portrays an ordinary Ugandan woman. Yeah. Very pregnant with twins. She didn't have money for a scan, so she didn't know she had twins. So she time to give birth, she goes to a health center 3. When she reaches there, she produces the first twin. After giving birth to the first twin, the second one was breech. Unfortunately, the health center 3 couldn't give her a C-section. So they give her a referral letter to go to Mityana General Hospital. Mityana General Hospital was 13 kilometers away on a Maram Road. Now just know there are no ambulances. They had to put on a border.
This is You and the Law, the COVID edition, here on House of Talent Television. My name is Jonathan Ochom, your host. As you all know, You and the Law is simply about the law and making it simple for any person in this country. Because as we've always discussed, the law affects every aspect of our lives, so it's only safer that you know about the law. This particular edition of You and the Law is focusing on COVID-19 and how it has affected our human rights. And today, in studio, we're discussing about the right to health. But before we go there, we need to know, what does the right to health mean? Who has the duty to fulfill that right? How has COVID-19 affected it? With me is Ms. Rose Wakikona. Rose is the Senior Program Officer at the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development. Rose, you're welcome to You and the Law.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you for having me here.
How have you been?
I've been good. I've been good. We're attending the Rule of Law Symposium for Uganda Law Society today.
Okay.
And we're discussing this very topic, so it's interesting that I'm carrying it on this show.
That's fine. So, talking about CEHURD, the kind of things that you do, maybe for somebody who could be, hearing about you for the first time, the organization, you could give us a little bit of a sneak peek into what the center does.
CEHURD was started in 2009, and the primary purpose of setting up the organization was to promote the justiciability of the right to health.
Justiciability.
The justiciability,
Some
which
of those words
enforcement.
Okay.
To make sure that you can enforce. There's a lot of concentration on civil political rights at that time, the right to vote, right to practice your religion, freedom of movement, all those civil political rights, as we would call them, but there's very little emphasis on what we call socio-economic rights, which deal majorly with social security, like the right to food, right to adequate food, the right to health, the right to clean and healthy environment, some of the right to shelter, all those fall within socio-economic and cultural rights. So we were challenging ourselves to say, are we able, is a human being, a Ugandan, able to enforce a socio-economic right within this country? So the organization was set up in 2009 to ensure that it does that. Its major aim was to do advocacy, to do litigation, but also empowerment in terms of the right to health. And we've done several cases in public interest litigation, majorly looking at maternal health, but we've also extended into issues of regulation of the private sector when it comes to health, and issues of mental health. So we've expanded into several areas where we've made inroads in litigating the right to health.
Okay, you sort of starting on a high note, talking about how enforceable this right is, but perhaps before we got there, can we just understand when we talk about the right to health, what are we talking about? Why should I care about the right to health? Like, what's the big deal about this right?
The right to
what
health.
does it contain as a package? What do I find? What will I find there if I say this is the right to health?
The right to health has its bedrock or its foundation in the human rights of Uganda. When you talk about the human rights of Uganda, they were set up after the Second World War. So countries went to war, they fought each other, everyone died. Then afterwards they said, we should stop killing each other. We should find a way of living harmoniously. So in 1948, the UN set up this big assembly. They met together and they passed what we call the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So many countries in the world, including countries that you wouldn't assume, are actually signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they established several human rights. And then they established several committees and several conventions to come up with specific rights and explain them. So thereafter, they set up what we call the Convention of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. So it has under Article 12 what they call the right to the highest attainable standard of health.
Highest attainable
standard of health. So this doesn't mean that you have a right to be healthy, that every time you get malaria, the government must be held responsible. No, no, you must take care of your own health, but it means that the government must put in place certain things to make sure that you're able to enjoy the highest attainable standard of health. Not just your physical health, but your mental health, your spiritual health, your social well-being, everything to make sure that you are okay and living in that particular way. So Uganda ratified this particular convention, and then we haven't yet domesticated it into our constitution per se, but jurisprudence or court decisions, which can also make law, have read into the fact that if you have ratified an instrument internationally, then you can enforce a particular right at a domestic level. So we enforce it through that, but we also enforce it through the right to life, and also through the right to freedom from cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, and also the right to dignity. So what does it mean for a normal Ugandan if the right exists?
Yes.
The right means that the government has what we call 3 obligations.
Yes.
There is an obligation to respect,
Yes.
an obligation to protect, and an obligation to fulfill.
Okay, that's a very interesting area.
Yes.
Yes. So let's build on those obligations because I want to see Ugandans holding people accountable on some of these issues. So when you talk about respect, what does it actually mean?
When we talk about respect, it means that the government by itself should stay away from violating that human right. So they shouldn't do anything that would not enable you to enjoy the right to
What are
health.
the things that a government will do that would make you sick?
For example, they can put in place a law or a policy that would forbid you from accessing that particular right. So they have to stay away from that.
Okay.
Equally, maybe they may take away a health center. There they are taking away your right. So they are not respecting it in that particular
If LDs
regard.
came is that
You're enforcing another human right, the right to health. Yeah, it could be in freedom from cruel, human and degrading
affects your
treatment.
health.
But it does affect your health because all human rights are interlinked and they just sort of feed into each other. So you can't have one without having the other. And it's one of the basic principles of human rights.
Okay.
So they cannot in any way stand in the way of you. Like, for example, if you remember what happened in COVID-19. Women were pregnant, they had to go to hospital to give birth.
Yes.
But then the curfew was saying that everyone must be at home.
And get a
but I
pass.
am due. So that in itself means the government is not respecting your human right because they are placing a barrier in place of you being able to
We'll talk about those COVID experiences later on.
Yes.
But you talked about 3 rights, you've explained one. How about the protect option?
The protect option now extends to third parties. When you're talking about protecting, it means that the government must make sure that no third party hinders your right to health. So they must put in place processes to make sure that people don't stop you from enjoying your right to health. I'll give an example of maybe if you've got an accident on the road and you need emergency care and you're rushed to a hospital. They have in their guidelines what they say that when a person comes in and they need emergency help, before they pay, treat them, put them in a place where they are okay and can survive, then they pay later. Now, where a health facility tells you that cash down before we put your leg back in order, the government has not put in place enough protective mechanisms for you to enjoy your right to health. So it's about the government's obligation to make sure that third parties do not interfere with your right to health. And the last one, which is fulfill, is the most contentious. Because the other 2 are easy. They just mean an obligation. But the challenge with fulfilling is that it imposes a positive obligation on the government. That beyond you stopping other people or beyond you stopping yourself from interfering in my right to health, I must go ahead and put in place certain things to make sure that you enjoy your right to health.
What are those things?
They must put in place hospitals, they must put in place health workers, they must put in place what we call goods and services.
Goods and services.
Goods and services.
Personnel.
Exactly. Everything, all that, medicine, equipment, blood everything must run efficiently as per the 5 pillars of the public health system.
Okay. Rose, you mentioned that we don't have an express law on the right to health. So how have you been, what have you been basing your advocacy on? Because then people would say, it's not by mistake that Uganda has not ratified this. Maybe it's by design. I don't know. So where do you then derive your mandate from, especially at the national level?
At a national level, where we derive our mandate from, as I said, our constitution within itself doesn't expressly provide for the right to health. But thereunder, they have a particular provision where they say that all the rights that are stated within Chapter 4 do not preclude other rights that are contained in any other instrument. They equally go ahead to say that if Uganda has ratified any other international instrument, then it can be enforced under the Constitution. So we have ratified the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We've also ratified the African Charter, which provides for the right to health under Article 14. So we can therefore enforce them there.
Also, you squeeze around.
Yeah, so it's a tall order. You go around the mountain, go around, but ultimately you arrive. But our Supreme Court, in a recent decision that was passed last year, I think it is a case that we had litigated on maternal health, where we were talking about challenging government's failure to provide basic maternal health commodities within public health facilities. Court agreed with us, and they said that the right to health is intrinsically provided for in the Constitution and therefore can be enforced. So that within itself, by court making that pronouncement, you can rely on that directly. You will survive under
the because Supreme Court definitely makes laws. And you talked about cases. I know that you put in a couple of cases in court on different, health rights. I don't know what your experience has been, litigating matters related to the right to health. What are some of the issues, challenges that you've been encountering?
I think some of the challenges that we have found is, number one, in the failure to delink the right to health from medical negligence. There is a need to always, the judges always, they don't understand the right to health independent of.
As a concept of
exactly, its own. Independent of medical negligence. The problem with medical negligence is that it looks at health in isolation, and it looks at the wrong that has been committed by a health worker individually. But when we tried to take cases to court through that way, we found that our system within itself is flawed. So a health worker may be available, but they cannot work on a patient because they have no gloves. Or maybe there is a case we had in Arua where there were 2 midwives and they were working on 40 mothers on a ward at one time. Definitely issues of blood, blood transfusion. A health worker may be there, but they don't have blood to transfuse you with. Or another case that we worked on in Mitiana, where the midwife was looking at a woman bleeding, but because they had no gloves, she couldn't even touch the woman. So people will blame the health worker, but then the system must support the health worker to do their job. And medical negligence cannot support such a claim. It cannot support it. So you have to take it through the right to health, because then you're able to attack the system in its entirety instead of limiting it to maybe the limitations of a health worker, because our health system within itself is completely flawed.
I mean, that's quite a chilling account, some of the revelations you're highlighting here. So then, with all the issues that we have in our health sector already, we get COVID-19. Novel, some people argue that, when it was in China, we were like, that's a Chinese problem. We're good, as a country. But then, I think it was around March or something like that, we started, the signal started dropping in that perhaps the virus is not very far from home, and a lot of things, had to change. So at this point, I would like to get your insights specifically on how COVID-19 impacted on, of course, human rights broadly, but specifically for this conversation, the right to health, because it's a health issue, of course. COVID is, but specifically from the way you've crafted explain the right to our viewers, we now see what obligations accrue and what needs to be done, and perhaps what was done. So I think we'll start after a short break on how the government of Uganda responded and how the virus affected our country. Viewers, you're watching You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. My name is Jonathan Ochom, and today we are sitting with Ms. Rose Wakikona from the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development that we mainly know, popularly know as CEHURD, to discuss how COVID-19 has affected the right to health. Let's go for a short break. We'll be right back.
When it comes to the law, we basically live the law. you know, on a day-to-day basis, you know. Whether it is in your bedroom, there is a law that governs it. If you're married, for example, even if you're single, there could be something touching on the law, because you might be in your bedroom with an underage girl, or you might be with another person's wife, you know. All the things are the law, you know.
If you're a human being, you have rights. Those rights are called human rights. They are examples: the right to health, the right to freedom from torture, that underscores human dignity, freedom from slavery. You're not supposed to be someone's slave.
If you look at our penal code, it sets out another marriage laws. It sets out the persons who can marry and those who cannot marry, right? For example, you can't marry your close relatives. You know, if you did, you'd be committing a crime.
The state is not supposed to tell you who to worship, how to worship, how many times a day. No, you have a right to work. A right to work. You have freedom of association.
Cohabitation for whatever period of time does not make you husband and wife, right? And that is why we emphasize to people that when the relationship is still hot, you know, you must ensure that you do what? Marry.
Yes.
You know?
For human rights to be respected, protected, and fulfilled, relevant government programs must actually work. Medicine should reach hospitals. Oxygen should be there. Health workers should have gloves. Teachers should be present. Now they are mostly absent, and they have left the profession, a good number of them. They are into trading. So things must work. If things don't work, human rights are not respected, are not protected, and are not fulfilled.
COVID-19 has tested our hope and faith as individuals, families, and the country at large. Besides destroying many aspects of our lives, the novel coronavirus has also affected our human rights in many ways. You and the Law, the COVID edition, is a 30-minute weekly television program that focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Uganda. The program engages experts to explain the importance of rights-based approaches to the success of any public health response to ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights amidst the challenges presented by COVID-19. You and the Law, the television program, brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda, taking the law to the last mile in proud association with I4C Africa Hub and House of Talent Television, coming soon.
Welcome back. This is You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. My name is Jonathan Ochom, your host. Today we're discussing the right to health, and we're privileged to have Ms. Rose Wakikona, a Senior Program Officer at the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development. Rose, welcome back from the break.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so before we went for the break, we started this conversation on how the right to health has been directly hit or affected by COVID-19. And I thought you could, pick on from there. What are your insights?
I don't think it has affected it negatively. I think it has exposed the challenges and the things that we have been talking about for the past, I don't know how many years.
Okay.
People always had this presumption that, social security is not an issue that we should put a lot of effort into. You people are asking for too much. There is this theory that they call progressive realization, that we can only put into social security as much as the country has. And that is when all our political leaders and all our mainstream ministries would keep saying that, Uganda is a developing country. And they even forget that we moved to developing and developed, and they say, we are a third world country. We have no money. We have no money. So internationally, the government had made commitments. They made commitments in the Abuja Declaration, where they said that they are going to commit 15% of the entire national budget to health.
15%.
15%.
Colossal sum.
That was about 10 years ago, I think, in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. But 10 years down the road, they can't do it. They are stuck at about 5%. I think this year we are at 6.5%, if I'm not mistaken. So they had hit a stall. And even that 6.5 that they committed to healthcare within the country, 70% of it is funded by external donors.
Yeah.
So maybe the EU will come in and contribute something to malaria, USAID will come in and contribute something to HIV, and that is the way that they would consolidate their budget.
Yeah.
But the government was putting very minuscule resources into the right to health. But it's not only the right to health in isolation, even in education, even in shelter. We know very well that this country is suffering a shelter deficit within the country itself. But they were doing nothing about it. They were no more interested in politics, politicking, prisons, and things to do with civil and political rights.
COVID...
But now when COVID came, it exposed the rot that existed. Suddenly, our healthcare system could not take in patients. It was ill-equipped. We had very few health workers who could even manage patients of the stature of COVID. They couldn't do free and mandatory testing as was expected by the WHO. We had no ICUs, no beds. We had nothing. We even had no PPEs. And indeed, the developed world was saying that, Africans are going to die like ants. And we all prepared to die like ants. But thank God that didn't happen, and that anticipation of gloom didn't happen. But it exposed what is going on within our healthcare system. This COVID-19, we saw how people struggled just to raise money to treat one COVID patient. It just showed us that all of us are one illness away from total, complete poverty. And it showed the importance of having social security. So the conversation started changing. Right now, even for the ULS to hold an entire symposium on the right to health, for me, it's an achievement within itself. Because way back, they are like, no, they are arresting some political prisoners. Let's go and rescue some victims of torture, which I know is very important. But ideally, a person's well-being and their ability to live a life which is of quality, I think it supersedes any other thing.
So you're celebrating?
We are celebrating.
Some people could argue that you're being sadist, you know, in a way, because I've spoken to people who've talked about other rights, labor, education, everything, and people are giving a gloomy picture, but you're here smiling.
I am. I am, because even now when I go to court, it's very easy for a judge to understand where I'm coming from. When you look at the maternal health petition that we argued it for over 10 years. And we were pushing court to understand that it is important for a health facility to have a glove so that a woman can give birth safely. And a judge couldn't understand that. They just couldn't. And you push. Finally, they agree. But now, when we filed a case challenging the regulation of private health facilities, suddenly everyone was understanding where we are coming from. The judge was like, indeed, these health facilities are charging too much money. How can you charge 5 million per person? No, the government agreed, and the matter was settled within a span of 1 month, which is something we had never heard of, because the government felt it wasn't a priority for them to look at social security. So for me to walk into a courtroom with a case, with a cause of action in the right to health, and the judge welcomes it, for me that calls for celebration.
Okay, quite a rare one, to be honest, from the number of people that we've hosted here. But then I'll take you to the government interventions. So of course, when the virus, came here, government had to act to ensure that we curb down its spread. But what do you make of the interventions that were put in place, and to what extent did they protect the right to health? What worked?
I think the COVID-19 exposed where we are going in the future with human rights, and that is the conflict that arises between human rights. Right now, you look at public health, then you look at them limiting our rights to freedom, you look at limiting the right to education, limiting the freedom to movement, and you see the tag. You begin to look at the tag. The interventions of the government, of course, were timely. For that, we thank them for whatever it is that they did. And they took it too far at one point.
Okay.
They took it too far because the purpose of limiting human rights was in order for them to establish, to prepare for the next phase, if I would say. So the first lockdown, they said, oh, all of you stay home. Let us buy beds. Let's equip our hospitals. Let's procure PPEs. Let's work on vaccines.
Yes.
And we all understood. And we stayed home. But they didn't do that. They didn't procure PPEs. They didn't equip our health facilities. They didn't do anything. So when the second phase comes in, again, it finds us where we were in the first phase.
Yes.
And again, they lock us down in order to prepare for a third wave. But again, they still haven't done what they are supposed to do. So the challenge is we now begin to delve deep into what does it mean to restrict a person's human rights indefinitely. When you're talking about restricting the right to education, and a child has been seated at home indefinitely, you don't know when the schools are going to open. Is that justifiable in a democratic society? We have to begin asking ourselves some of these questions, because it's well and good, even our constitution says that these rights can be limited for purposes of national security, which includes, it has been interpreted again in another case in the Supreme Court, to include issues of public health. But then again, there are schools of thought that are coming in to say, what does it mean to restrict my right indefinitely? So there are people who have come up, and there are decisions that have been made on how you can be able to restrict a human right. And number one, they say it must be within law. Now, the restriction of human rights on the basis of law is under the Public Health Act.
Yes.
But our Public Health Act was made in 1935. It caters to diseases like smallpox, measles, diseases of long ago. Some of us just hear them like there used to be smallpox somewhere, but really it's not a reality for most of us. And this brings to our mind archaic laws. Can you limit my right based on an archaic law?
But we had presidential directives. Were they not filling the void?
But now those presidential directives, were they made legally? Because under the Public Health Act, the powers are given to the minister. I don't know when our president became a minister, but he constituted himself into a wrong.
Some people argue
it's a wrong office.
That ministers exercise delegated authority.
No, but for her,
so
she's given powers directly from the law. But now she was deriving her powers from the presidential directives instead of from the Public Health Act, as she is mandated to do. So that within itself also wasn't legally done. The person who was supposed to be at the forefront of the fight against COVID-19 was supposed to be the minister to issue ministerial directives and statutory instruments. But now they turned it upside down. But on a basis of a law which is an inheritance of colonialism. Again, we go down to the discussions that we are having right now of decolonizing some of our laws. And this is not the only law. I'll also point out another archaic law we have in health, which is the Venereal Diseases Act.
What makes it archaic? Is it just the year of birth?
No, it was made in 1975. Do we still call them venereal diseases?
I have no idea.
They are now called sexually transmitted infections. But the law that is supposed to deal with some of these diseases still refers to syphilis, all the diseases, not the new current STIs that we have. And it is the similar situation. So our law wasn't prepared to handle an epidemic like COVID-19. It wasn't, because it was on a basis of old law. It is really, really an old law. So it brings in issues. This law was even made before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which means that even within itself, it doesn't contextualize or bring the human rights aspects. So it centers not the patient, it centers the doctor. So the decision of the doctor becomes final in everything that you do. They will look at you and say, oh, it seems you have COVID-19, and then they will mandate your quarantining, they will mandate they can enter, search your property without any notice, they can destroy your property without compensation, isolate your family without any compensation to you, without any notice, without any explanation. Because in those days, public health was centered around the doctor, but never the patient. So that is the problem with that particular law. So we have statutory instruments that come out that again center the health worker. That's why you see women dying on streets while trying to give birth. You see so many things that are going wrong, but it's because we haven't inculcated human rights within our particular laws.
So as far as you are concerned, COVID only acted to expose what you've been singing about, and just telling us as a country that, okay, perhaps now you can hear us out.
Indeed. It exposed the rot within our healthcare system. Our healthcare system has a lot of challenges, right from the skilling of our doctors to the point of equipping our health facilities. You know, we're working on a case in Mityana, and this is one of the saddest cases I had ever dealt with, because this woman was pregnant. It just portrays an ordinary Ugandan woman. Very pregnant with twins. She didn't have money for a scan, so she didn't know she had twins. So she reaches, time to give birth, she goes to a health center 3. When she reaches there, she produces the first twin. After giving birth to the first twin, the second one was breech. Unfortunately, the health center 3 couldn't give her a C-section. So they give her a referral letter to go to Mityana General Hospital. Mityana General Hospital was 13 kilometers away on a Maram Road. Now just know there are no ambulances. They had to put on a border. So they put on a border, she sits like a man, and they start moving. Along the way, she falls off. Then they carry her, put her back. Then they reach Mityana General Hospital. When they reached there, she had only got one mama kit in antenatal, because the expectation was she was going to give birth to one child. So at Mityana General Hospital, the midwife asked her, where is your mama kit? It's like, I don't know. I don't have. They used it the other side. Okay.
Rose, we need to go for a break. We'll pick on from there and try to look to the future, thinking about how do we handle this in case we find ourselves in this situation. Viewers, you're watching You and the Law, the COVID edition. Today we're discussing the right to health. How has it been affected by COVID-19? Let's go for a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. This is You and the Law, the COVID edition. Today we're discussing the right to health and how it's been affected by COVID-19. And with me in studio is Rose Wakikona, our Senior Program Officer at CEHURD. CEHURD is the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development. Rose, welcome back from the break.
Thank you.
So we need to look at the future. But we can walk a few steps back. Because I remember when COVID came, everybody said, you know, we've handled Ebola before. We've handled cholera before. So this will pass as well. But I wanted to sort of start with asking, what lessons have we learned or should we learn from COVID-19? What are those things that we should reflect on as a country? And then later on, I'll talk about, you know, your recommendations. But I thought it's important to learn first. What do we learn from the current situation that we find ourselves in from the angle of health rights?
I think one of the biggest lessons that we have learned is about quality of life. we emphasize a lot, especially in African tradition, but even in Uganda, the number of people we have. But we rarely consider the quality of lives that people live. And we leave it to people to fend for themselves at that level. And you know, socioeconomic cultural rights come in to buttress the issue of quality of life.
Yes.
So I think the big learning was the quality of life that people live actually matters.
Yes.
It's important to have social security in place. People should be able to walk into a hospital and get treatment. People should be able to walk into a school and get out in P7 when they can read and write.
That should be the normal.
That should be the normal. It shouldn't be the abnormal that, oh my God, you can read a book. So some of these things we should normalize having good quality life.
Yes.
And I think as a country that is something that we need to begin demanding from our government. We need to begin demanding strongly. And for me that was a big learning. But also the other big learning, which we knew but we didn't really know, was the gaps in our healthcare system and how hard hit it was, how our healthcare workers suffered to hold this country afloat when we were suffering with COVID-19. So for me, I think those were some of the big learnings we had.
Okay. So we're looking at the future. Rose could be our Minister of Health, or having a portfolio in the government, and then you're a duty bearer, like you've been explaining set obligations at the start of the show. Worst case scenario, we find ourselves in a similar situation, in pandemic, a natural disaster of these proportions. Can you run us through a few ideas that you think can enable the country prepare better to be able to deal with that problem and ensure that we protect people's right to health? What should be done to say that, okay, if anything like this happens again, we are good as a country, we'll deal with it?
I think the first thing we need to do is to honor our international obligations. As a country, we need to increase funding for health. We need to increase funding as of yesterday. We can't be here and saying that 70% of our health budget is being financed by external people who will then dictate what they can or cannot finance. That's why you'll find maybe HIV has a lot of money, but things like TB have no money at all. Issues like cancer have no money at all. It's because our healthcare system is being managed by external partners. As a country, we need to urgently increase our budget, internal budget, not external budget for health. Let us pay our health workers well. What's wrong with a doctor getting 5 million shillings per month? Will the country die? They won't. There is no evil in paying our health workers well. There is no evil in buying medicine and equipping our hospitals. But that will only come when we prioritize the funding of our health care system. But the second thing that is coming up, and which has really struck us hard in this COVID-19 pandemic, is our archaic laws. We keep talking about, we were celebrating Independence Day. Afterwards I said, but what are we independent from? If they are still holding me accountable to laws,
The 1935 law,
that were left for by the British. The British have moved on. They no longer have those laws on their statute books. But as we cling on to them as if, you know, the other time I was talking to a fellow lawyer and I was wondering, why are our judges wearing wigs? Why are they wearing those why are we supposed to wear flaps, gowns, what? Those are not African things.
you want to wear backcloth to court.
Let us wear backcloth to court. The Kenyans have done it, and I think they've done a really good job of decolonizing their judiciary. They've done a good job of decolonizing their justice system. I think we need to borrow a leaf. Instead of thinking that a lawyer is that person who wears a wig in court, let it be a lawyer is that person who wears backcloth in court.
Not a witch doctor.
So let us decolonize our laws. I think our Public Health Act has shown us that our Uganda Law Reform Commission needs to wake up. There are very many laws on our statute books that are just not cognizant of what is going on in the country right now or the recent developments in science. And we need to be able to update them according to our African context. And we need to deal with things in an African way. During COVID-19, we were borrowing heavily from WHO, which was borrowing heavily from the global north. But we found that their solutions were not working for us.
Not fitting.
They say social distance, but you're living in a house with 10 people and there are 2 rooms. How are you going to social distance? So we need homegrown solutions to some of our challenges instead of just relying on God to save us. This time he saved us in COVID-19. The next pandemic, he might not be able to do that. Yeah.
So for you, it's about financing the sector, legal review, and that should be able to. Now, part of the emphasis of this show is on rights-based approaches to pandemics. And I'm wondering, from where you sit, what are some of these, how would that look? What does a right-based approach to a pandemic, what would it look like? And if Uganda has been following those approaches?
By and large, Uganda has not been following those approaches, especially with its statutory instruments. As I told you right now, there is a criteria for limiting human rights. Because in the human rights discourse, you can't limit a human right because of public interest, which includes public health. So, but to restrict it, there are 3 criteria that you must meet. The first one is that it must be set in law, that this right can be legally restricted. The second one is that it must address a pressing concern. And the last is that there must be a time limit. We have not done anything about time limits. We've had curfew for the past, I don't know, 3 years now. I don't even know how. But that is an abrogation of my human right. But there is no end in sight for curfew. So every now and then, the reason why they insist on limiting the restriction is that every time you limit it, you must reassess whether you need to continue or not. This thing of restricting the right to education without any end in sight. So even that within itself needs to be addressed, especially the time factor for the limitations of the human right. But at the same time, not thinking that COVID-19 is the only disease that affects people. People need their ARVs, they need their contraceptives, they need their condoms. Allow them to be able to get them in peace.
Yes. Okay. Viewers, Rose has made a very strong case. One, we need to fund our health sector. We need to review our laws as a country, because then we'll be able to live with the times when you get a pandemic that is disturbing us in this day and age. Stop relying on cake laws. And I hope MPs out there or responsible ministers are listening, are watching, and able to take action, because today we might survive, but we don't know what the future could look like. With that, viewers, we've come to the end of today's episode of You and the Law, the COVID edition. I've been your host, Jonathan Ochom, and we've been having a discussion on the right to health with Rose Wakikona from the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development. And next week, we'll have a look at another right which has been affected by the pandemic. And that you will get to know when the show runs. With that, we've come to the end. I'll see you next time.
I come from the Pearl of Africa. It's a beautiful country with beautiful nature. To me, it really inspires me and motivates me. And actually, in one of my tags on my clothing, especially on my jeans, you see those lines that appear on the back pockets of the jeans. When I was doing my internship in Paris, I happened to go to a fashion museum where I read a few books, you know, about fashion designers and their names and about their creations and things like that. There are signs on jeans like the Wrangler, the Lee jeans. All those jeans have signs on the pockets. And before I went to Paris, I was doing that already because I was drawing my inspiration. I used to love geography. And the Ugandan, East African geography was really very interesting to me. You know, knowing that I come from the Great Lakes, East African Rift Valley, that's why you see those lines on my jeans. I brought two theories because they are just theories about the creation of the Great East African Rift Valley. So I put those. So it's the nature and the music that really inspires me and motivates me.
Wow. It is a creative industry talk. My name is Eddie Okila, and of course, my guest this morning has been around the world. A man who has worked in the investment banking sector. He's an engineer by profession. He is a ballroom dancer, the British 2015 champion of the ballroom dance. And of course, he's a creative thinker. He's a man who is trying to turn life of the farmers in northern Uganda around and trying to give them meaning creatively using energy, electricity created from food waste to useful stuff. Ladies and gentlemen all across the world, the one and only engineer Peter Odokonyero. In fact, his name is Peter Benhor Odokonyero Nyeko. Peter, welcome to the show. I had to get this right today.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're welcome to the program, and of course, I like the new look of you. Today, we're not seeing you on, you know, the suit and Mr. Uganda, the tie. I think some people are going to be heavily confused of how creative you have become to come onto the creative industry talk. How are you today?
Awesome, awesome. Bonjour à tous. Sabah al-khair. Buenos dias, bon dia to everyone.
Wow.
That's Shanghai.
All right. So yes. Peter has just returned from France and is fresh from Montefiore with French President Emmanuel Macron, and of course many people there from Africa, from the new Africa-French relationships and the conference that happened in France just a week ago. And today on the program, we're focusing on that discussion. If you will put the topic up there for everyone to see all across the world. This is the House of Talent Television. We're talking about the New Africa-France Summit 2021. What does it really mean for Uganda creative industry? And that will be the very first start of this interview, Pete.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's great to be here again.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You're welcome.
Yes. And we were great and grateful, with my colleagues to spend a few days in France, in Paris and Montpellier. Montpellier is on the south of France. It's basically on the Mediterranean Sea. Lovely weather. It felt like being in Kampala, actually, with at least 21 others who went with us from Uganda, from different industries, including the creative industry space.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So we want to just dive into that conversation, Peter, today, just to sort of understand, what does this new Africa, France relationship means to the African creative industry? And to start from the Africa perspective, then we'll narrow it down to East Africa and we'll bring it down to Uganda. What does this really mean to us? What is France saying to us?
Ultimately, creativity comes down to the building blocks of life.
Yeah.
Comes down to understanding.
Yeah.
Comes down to communication, to conversation, and to understanding each other. Understanding each other's customs, each other's cultures, each other's best points, each other's needs for encouragement or otherwise, and each other's inspirations. So one way of looking at it is saying, great, I mean, how do we communicate? You know, what language do we use? Do we speak to each other in French, in France? Do we speak to each other in an African language in Africa? Do our French colleagues learn our languages? Do we learn their languages? Do we learn how to eat their food? Do they learn how to eat our food? Do we learn how to make it? Do we find interesting ways to find similarities between us? What do our grandmothers teach us? Could it be the same thing? What do our grandfathers teach us? Could it be the same thing as well? Yeah. And finding within that, within our cultures and traditions, a lot of similarities that we can build on. And that's one way of looking at it, kicking off. But then also, when we think of it from the other side, we also have similar challenges. You know, we're all on Mother Earth. So the environment is important to all of us. The future is important to all of us. The climate is important to all of us. And, you know, little children who are being born and growing, we all want to make sure they live in a better world than we're in now. And so these are some of the few similarities we have in common, and I'm sure there's so many more. So what creativity is so important, and the industry of creativity is so important, is because it allows us to explore our similarities in many ways and accentuate them and build our relationships around those.
Wow. This is the Creative Industry Talk. My name is Eddie Okela. Mr. Peter Nyeko is in the studio, is fresh from France, and we're talking about the New Africa France Summit 2021 and what it means for the creative industry in Africa. And Peter has just given us a whole different, perspective to this. New Africa, what does this really mean to Ugandan creatives, if you will break it down? We want to just, first before the Ugandan, but today, East Africa.
Indeed.
East Africa has a few spots that has a relationship with France. We are not necessarily a very deep French-speaking countries, but we are part of the African continent, which France is saying this is we need to have a new African relationship with us. What does this really mean to the Anglo-speaking countries in East Africa when France brings and starts this kind of conversation?
Awesome. What's interesting is, even if you go to England, if you go to the United Kingdom, and you look at the coat of arms of the royal family, there is there written, Dieu est mon droit. It's written in French.
Okay. Dieu est mon droit.
Dieu est mon droit.
Dieu est mon droit.
Yeah. So it's like, God and my right. Yes. And so already, even as we speak English, there is so much of France in the English that we do speak. Okay. We tell each other bon appetit when we're eating. Yes. And many other things. We say au revoir when we want to see each other again. Yes. But it's more than just that. In the end, Africa is a wonderful continent which has had interesting histories. The histories may have been joyful. They could be more joyful in other areas. But what's interesting is whether we look at history from one side of Africa or another side of Africa, there's a lot we can learn from history. And there's a lot we can work with what we know from history to make the future even brighter. And that's what I see from this. There is so much that we here in Uganda, for example, have learned from our brothers and sisters in the more French-speaking parts of Africa, especially when it comes down to culture, fashion, music, and so on. I mean, over the years, as Uganda's own music industry was being built, I'm pretty sure there was a lot of music coming in from the Congo and other places, Pepe Kale, all these guys, before we had our own people on this side coming up with the music. So with music already, we've seen that conversation. with fashion, we still see that conversation all across. My shirt's made in Kampala, but the tailor was born in Congo.
Yes.
So, I mean, that conversation is already happening as we speak. We just want to take that conversation deeper.
Okay.
And let it flow both ways.
Yeah.
There's also a lot from the East African way of doing things that can be shared on the other side as well.
Yeah.
The entrepreneurial way of life and a few other things as well.
Yeah.
So that conversation is something which, starts off in Africa, hence, new in Africa, but it also flows in to France and other places.
Yeah.
Because France has a lot of Africa in it as well.
Yeah.
Not just in the last 100 years, but if you go historically way back, think of the Africans, who were part of the Roman ecosystem as France became part of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Think about the relationship going back, way back to those days, thousands of years ago. So it's not just 100 years.
This relationship has been there before.
It has been there. It's been there before, yes.
Now, Peter, we just want to encourage everyone to, go onto our YouTube, subscribe, like, share far and wide. We're live on Facebook. We're live on Twitter for those who are on the move. Twitter is live for you right there, and of course on our website. So any of those platforms that you're watching the program from, please go and share it far and wide. We're going to have a great conversation with Peter, and we're just trying to sort of like lay a ground to, what does this, New Africa, France 2021 summit means to us going forward. Peter, you've broken this from the Africa perspective. We want you to and you've talked about it from the East African perspective. Let's bring it home.
All right.
Home is Uganda. And Uganda has been the home and the host to Alliance Francaise and the French embassy for many years. And the relationship has been working on. Back in the days, we used to have a lot of the French, Alliance Francaise and UGCS, which is the Gautier Foundation. And all of this about promoting creativity, culture, and beginning to foster relationship for, cross-cultural learning, for peace building. What does this mean when the French people and the president begin to say New Africa? What does it mean for Uganda and the creative industry?
Awesome. So new is an interesting word, you know. New is rebirth.
Yeah.
You could think about it that way.
Yeah.
Rejuvenation, and new could be starting with where you are and discovering more within that and expanding upon it.
Yeah.
And so we're saying it's amazing, Many of us who are above a certain age will remember a day when there were lots of cars on Uganda's roads that were made in France. Do you remember what those cars were called?
Yes, Renault.
And
the Peugeot.
And that one in French, what do they call it?
Peugeot.
Yes.
The 504,
yes.
the 204.
Indeed. So there's enough of that in there already.
Yeah.
But when we come to today, go to all the restaurants around Kampala, coffee shops, you'll find croissants all around Kampala. So I mean, it's already changing as we see.
Yeah.
And we love that. But we're saying, what more is there? If we think about it from a different angle, we talked about creative industry.
Yes.
And creative industry, creativity and industry goes beyond fashion, goes beyond music, goes beyond dance, goes to the building blocks of industry itself. Because industry itself is creativity made real.
Yeah.
And if we think about the creative industries of France, or the industries which are of a French origin, that have brought their creativity to Uganda. I mean, we know very well that very many Ugandan young people went to study about, engineering of a certain type, and there's a huge investment from a number of large French companies in Uganda, linked a lot to, other industries, whether you're thinking it from the point of view of energy, or you're thinking it from the point of view of water, or from the point of view of logistics, or from the point of view of infrastructure and roads. When you think about it from that angle as well now, you go, how big is France's investment conversation with Uganda?
Okay, that's a very interesting conversation to have.
And when we think about it from that point of view, is it a fleeting investment or is it an investment for the ages? If it is an investment for the ages, if that investment will be there for generations, our conversations should also be built on building blocks that can go on for generations. Therefore, the communication has to be renewed in many ways. We have to find new and more interesting ways to understand each other even more. Who knows, maybe I speak to someone in French, in France, in French, and they speak back to me in Luo. Maybe we'll try something like that. Who knows? Maybe I'll go to France and have Luombo in Paris, and they'll come to Kampala and have croissants in Kampala. Who knows? I mean, we already have, you know, Ugandan fashion designers based in France, don't we? There's a lovely lady there.
We have Stella Tal based in France. We have another lady based in France, and Stella actually has been teaching in a French school.
Awesome, awesome, indeed.
For these years, and she's been teaching people our culture in a low, in a you know, preschool.
Yes.
And of course, teaching also people in the community.
Indeed, indeed.
Yes, and we've hosted her on creative industry quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then down the road here, we've got the Alliance Française, you know, around the corner, we've got the École Française, but many Ugandan schools are teaching French, you know, and Ugandan universities as well are teaching French. And a lot of our professional public sector servants in different sectors of government are quite fluent in French. You know, I've had conversations with people in agriculture who speak French as well as, you know, you could possibly imagine, and so on and so forth. So the building blocks are there. But now we need to say, great, Uganda is a very young country. We've got great building blocks. How can we build on from these building blocks and involve these young people who are the future of this country in this conversation? And that's where it becomes really interesting. And that's what takes us to the speech which was made by His Excellency the President of France in Ouagadougou in 2017, which went on to what happened a couple of weeks ago in France, with people coming together, conversations being frank, honest, respectful, hopeful, and positive. And that's really exciting from that angle. If you go and follow on Twitter or on the internet, and just Google, you know, in English, because all those websites now are in English as well, you know, even though they're obviously in French as well, but you Google New Africa